Welcome back to the channel. As you may recall, a few videos ago we tried to build a Socket A system using this case that we cleaned up, but we had a bit of a failure with the motherboard. It died very near the end of the video, so we never actually got to finish that project. So today we're going to try again. We're going to go for a very slightly different motherboard. We're going to pretend it's 2001, not 2000, and that means we have access to DDR memory. Hope you enjoy seeing this case again. We're going to put together a system that's slightly different. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you make it to the end, don't forget to like and subscribe if you did enjoy it. Okay, so what's different this time? Well, the main difference is we have a new motherboard, one that works, hopefully, and it's a bit more like the original one. It's a better shape this way. It'll fit in the case better. We won't have trouble getting the ATA cables routed around the drive cage. It's an SIS chipset rather than VIA, but it's basically a very, very similar spec to the first one. But the main difference is that rather than doing a build from 2000, we're now doing a build from 2001. And what that means is we're still keeping the 1.1 gigahertz Duron, but we're also now have the access to DDR memory. So we're going to have twice as fast memory subsystem, and that will probably help us. And that's kind of what happened in 2001, started the transition to DDR memory. Everything else is pretty much exactly the same as before though. We're still going to use the SandBlaster live value, same cooler, same processor, same network card, same hard disk, same operating system. The only thing we're going to do different actually is a different power supply, and the reason for that is that when the other board failed, I wasn't sure if it was the power supply or the motherboard. I was pretty convinced it was the motherboard, but having put the voltmeter on the power supply, it's a little bit low on the voltages, not by much. And it's the same as another power supply I've got from the same manufacturer, from the same kind of model range. So I think it's specific to that manufacturer. I don't think it's a faulty power supply, but we are going to try a new power supply just to be on the safe side. So basically this is it. This is what's going inside this 2001 Socket A build. Let's get on with it. So if you remember from the other video, we've got a removable motherboard tray. It's going to make things quite a lot easier. Let's get the power supply in. So nothing really special about it, apart from the fact that it has got a strong 5-volt rail, as is allegedly required for Socket A motherboards. It's a much newer power supply than the other one. It's from 2009, judging by the date code, and it's a little bit more powerful. It's 550 watts, so plenty of power. Too much power really for the age, but I feel safe and comfortable putting this in. Hopefully it won't blow up the motherboard. It's quite a snug fit getting it to fit in those two little rails that are on this machine. It does have the nice option of having a switch on the power supply. So power supplies it in. Let's concentrate on the motherboard next. So what motherboard are we using? This is an ASRock K7S8X, and it's an SIS 746FX chipset hiding under this heatsink here, and this is what gives it the DDR capability. Still Socket A though. It's got 3 DIMM sockets, which is nice, and depending on what speed you put in, depends on the maximum amount of memory that you can install in this board. So you can actually have up to 3 gigs of memory in this board, but we're using Windows ME, and so the maximum recommended for that is really 512 megs. So we're probably only going to use 1, maybe 2 of these sockets, depending on how much memory we decide to put in. It's got IDE, 2 channels, floppy connector, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 PCI slots and an AGP slot. And the other advantage you're going for a DDR based motherboard is that we get AGP 8X. Not that we're probably going to be using that, because the graphics card we've got is only 4X compatible. All the caps look in good condition. It's a little bit dusty in places, and I've tidied that up as best I can, but hopefully this board will work. An interesting note is if you go to the ASRock website and download the motherboard manual for this, the link takes you to the correct K7S8X sheet, and when you download it, it actually says that it's K7S8X on the front page, but the actual title of the document you're downloading is K7VT2_UM. And so basically the reason I bring this up is that the jumper positions for setting the front side bus are in a different position. According to the manual, they're over here. up by the RAM slots, but in fact on this actual motherboard they're here, and I think that's because the motherboard manual is a revision of an earlier K7VT2 motherboard manual, and therefore they've got things slightly in the wrong place. Either that or there's more than one revision of this motherboard, but I couldn't find specific revisions for manuals. This board hopefully is working. Let's put the CPU in and some RAM, and then we'll mount it on the back plate. So the CPU is this one with the missing pads on it, so we need to be a little bit careful when we're mounting the heatsink that we're not going to chip the edge of the CPU die, which is actually exposed. Just going to put some MX2 on there. So don't forget that socket A is an asymmetric socket. The cutout here is for this raised part of the socket. So don't put your heatsink on the wrong way around. CPU fan is socket is hiding just down here. And so we've got 3 sockets for memory. Let's put one in. Again, I'm going to use the one furthest away from the AGP slot, simply because it makes getting cards in and out of the AGP slot a little bit easier. It is marked DDR3, so that is the 3rd socket. We don't have dual channel memory or anything at this point in PC Evolution, so it shouldn't matter which socket we put it in theory. So there we go, there's the motherboard. So let's put the motherboard on the motherboard tray. If you remember, we put these extra 2 standoffs because the other board was wider, so let's just take those out because this is a narrow board. Now all the other screws should line up. I've just noticed there's an extra hole here which hasn't got a standoff on it, so let's fix that. Particularly as we're missing one from here. Let's try it again. Just put that one in loosely. Put the diagonal in loosely. Check all the lines hold up. All the holes line up, which they do. Okay, once the last screw is in, we'll tighten all the others up. So this particular motherboard has an Ethernet port, as well as a gain port, as well as built-in sound. So we'll be disabling the built-in sound, but we'll keep the Ethernet port. That means we don't need that add-in PCI card for the Ethernet. We've also got USB 2, and that means we can use a memory stick for moving files on and off this machine relatively easily. So we're just going to put the motherboard tray back in. It goes in just past these notches and then slides across. And an interesting design feature is that these screws here, which look like they're part of the case surround, are actually to secure the motherboard tray to the frame to make sure it doesn't move. So when you put the case back on and put the screws in for that, there'll be some extra holes that you can use to secure the motherboard tray. As you can see, this board is a bit narrower, so we've got much better access to the power and the IDE than we had before. So the case is as we left it, so I've left in the floppy drive and the optical drive that we had in before, so it should be very quick just to get this up and running. So the motherboard manual was wrong for the switches for setting the front side bus. Hopefully they're not wrong for attaching the front panel connectors. So we have a small problem in that we've got a 3-pin power LED front case and only 2 pins available on the motherboard. That's not a problem, we just leave the power LED off. We do need to connect the speaker. Now at the moment there's no chassis fan in here, so there's nothing else to connect in terms of the case, but we will now start connecting up all the internal devices. Because we had temporarily put the case together before, the floppy drive's only got screws on one side, it's a bit wobbly, and there's only one screw holding in the optical drive, and obviously there's no hard drive at the moment, so it's just fix all of that. So what you generally find is that there are cutouts on the other side to be able to access the screw holes. So I've already got one screw on this side. Let's just put in the optical drive, let's put a second one in. Don't forget you want relatively short screws when you're dealing with your optical drives, because you don't want them encroaching too far into the interior of the drive. Now I've made a bit of a schoolboy error. I forgot that this motherboard came with a back panel, so we need to install that. Because we're going mid-range, we bought the 20 gig 7200 RPM drive. That's getting a little bit small for 2001, but the 7200 RPM makes up for that. There we go. So the optical drive doesn't need an 80-pin cable, so we're just going to use a 40-pin cable for that. Also, I'm using one that's only got a connector at each end. If we put another optical drive in here, we'll need to change this cable, obviously. So it's got to go on the second IG channel, so that's the one closest to me, furthest away from the edge of the board. The hard drive definitely does need an 80-pin ribbon just to get the most out of it. And then we're just using a standard floppy cable for the floppy disk drive. Now, floppy disk drive power is on the far side of the drive as we're looking at it, so I'm just going to put the power in before I put the cable in. Right, cables are in, let's connect up the devices. So the hard drive is jumpered as cable select. We'll do a little bit of cable management in a minute. So the optical drive is also jumpered as cable select, so there should be no problem anything being recognised in the BIOS, but we will soon know. In fact, the cables aren't that messy. I think we're just going to leave them like that for now until we know it's all working. Let's get some power into the devices. There we go. So that gives us a spare Molex for an extra hard drive. And then we've got a spare Molex up here for the other optical drive. Because the power supply is a bit newer, it's got serial RTA88, serial ATA power connectors, which we don't need. It's also got a 6-pin PCIe connector, which we don't need. And in this case, we don't need the 4-pin motherboard connector either. So I'm just going to cable tie all of those together. What we do need, of course, is the ATX power connector for the motherboard. On this motherboard, it's convenient at the top of the board here, so I can just pop that in from the top. So we have a lot of components in. We've got the motherboard, CPU, heatsink, some RAM, power supply, hard drive, floppy drive, and optical drive. What we're missing is two important components. A graphics card. So don't forget, we're building a mid-range system, so we're going to go with a GeForce 2 card still. So GeForce 3 would just have come out around this time. We'd been buying a previous gen card, and in this case it's the GeForce 2 MX400. In this case we've got a 64 meg card, so it's a slightly more high end of the mid-range. And similarly, we could just rely on the onboard sound if we were going for budget, but we're going for mid-range, so we're going to put in a Sound Blaster Live Value Edition. And this should give us slightly better quality sound than that comes from the onboard audio. Also gives us surround sound. This does have an onboard gain port though, so we must remember to disable the motherboard gain port and audio when we try and get this working. So as before, I'm going to put the sound card in the bottom slot, just away from any other components, just to try and make it as noise free as possible. Now, interestingly, that's not going to work because there's no standoff in this corner of the board. It's flexing too much for me to actually fully insert the card, so we're going to have to use a higher slot. So I reckon the third one, the middle one, should be good enough. It's close enough to a standoff that it shouldn't make a difference. It shouldn't flex. There we go. Yep, that's gone in. Only one choice of position for the AGP card, of course. So I'm just going to put in one of these screws that retains the motherboard tray, just to make sure the motherboard is as flush up against here as possible, because that graphics card is just a little bit far away and looks a bit messy with all these empty slot covers missing. So let's put some of those back in. And this one's the wrong colour. That's definitely coming out. That's better. Okay, I think we're ready to go. We have a monitor plugged in. We have generic beige keyboard to match the case. We have power into the back of the machine. Let's see what happens when we turn it on. Nothing at all. Power switch on the power supply. Let's try that. We have lights. We have a hard drive, and we have a BIOS post. So let's go into the setup. Okay, so it's telling us that the checksum's bad, we know that. I have put a fresh CMOS battery in here, so we should be able to fix that. Let's put in some reasonable dates. Got a reasonable date and time in. Floppy drive, we have one 1.44 installed, so that is correct. We don't have a second floppy drive. Has it detected the hard drive? It has, perfect. So 20 gig hard drive on a primary channel, and then the optical drive as the master on the secondary channel. Bus mastering we want enabled to get both best performance, but we should enable smart as well for best reporting. So it's a K7 S8X, and we've got the latest BIOS P2.6. It's recognised the Duron correctly, it's a 1.1 gigahertz, and it's recognised our memory correctly, 256 megs of DDR RAM in the third DIMM slot. Now it's recognised it as DDR333, and it's definitely not, it's definitely a 400 megahertz SIM. We can leave that as that for now, just to be on the safe side. We can always change that later. So the CPU frequency is changed by the jumper on the motherboard, which we previously discussed. It's recognising the RAM at 333 megahertz, not 400. We can change this manually later, although it's not giving us a 400 megahertz option. So I do wonder if that's because it's in the wrong slot. If we put it in a different slot, it might perform differently. So we've got USB enabled. The primary graphics card is on the AGP slot. Shouldn't make a difference, but and fast writes are enabled, good. Let's turn off the things we don't need. So we do need a floppy disk drive. We don't need the serial port. We don't need the parallel port in this particular case. We don't want the MIDI, and we don't want the game port either. I want that disabled. We do want both IDEs, the LAN we want enabled, and the onboard audio we want disabled. So it's telling the CPU temperature to 41 degrees. The fan's not running very fast, but it is running. So that's all good. Fan speed is about 2,500 RPM. Voltages look decent. So we've got quick boot enabled, so we don't do a RAM check. We're not going to boot from the network at any point. We do need to change this. So we really want the optical drive to be next and the hard drive to be last. Other boot devices, yes, so we might have to boot off USB in an emergency. But basically we are done. So if we do this, it should get a normal post. We shouldn't get any problems reported. Let's recognise the hard drive and the memory correctly. And it's going to complain because there's no operating system. Brilliant. So, progress. This is a working motherboard. Let's try and install Windows ME. Put the Windows ME bootable CD in the optical drive. Technically it's an upgrade version, so it may ask us, because there's nothing on this hard disk, it may ask us to actually provide a Windows 98 CD. Let's find out. So they can't find a boot record from the CD/DVD. So in fact, are the upgrade disks not bootable? To make sure you have got an installed operating system. Ooh, clever Microsoft, if that's the case. So let's take out the Windows ME disk. Let's put in a Windows 98 SE disk. See if we can boot off that. Because it's possible there's something wrong with the optical drive. Nope. So there you have it. Windows ME upgrade disks are not bootable. So what we're going to do is we're going to start the computer with CD-ROM support and then change the optical drives over. In fact, first of all, we're going to partition this disk. So what is on this hard drive already? There is one FAT32 volume on there that is ready to go by the looks of it, but not bootable. So we're not going to do anything with that, but we're now going to take out the Windows 98 CD, pop the Windows ME upgrade disk back in, and run the setup from there. Now, Windows ME came out before this motherboard, this chipset, so it's not going to have all of the drivers available. Okay, because the upgrade disk is asking for a qualified product check. So we need a setup disk for Windows 98 in the optical drive for it to be happy. So it's happy that we are genuine users of Windows 98. If you actually have a retail version of Windows ME, it just wasn't the first thing I came to. So we're using the upgrade instead. Extra hoops to jump through, but not too traumatic. So Windows ME came with some new features for Windows, things that were carried over to Windows XP. Let's just make sure they're all installed. Could put hyperterminal in, it's sometimes useful. Don't want MSN Messenger, thank you very much, or NetMeeting. We do want both of those just in case. We're on desktop themes, yes please. So some of those are from the Microsoft Plus, I think. What's our multimedia options? So yeah, let's put some sound schemes in there. So Windows Media Player is one of the things that is a first for Windows ME. Yeah, we want all of those. Absolutely. We don't want Web TV for Windows, that's a little bit redundant now. So Duron 1.1 gigahertz Windows ME. So we didn't create a bootable drive, we can always do that later. So this is going to take about 25 minutes. So I'm not going to bore you with that. We'll do a jump cut to the end processed. Okay, well that's somewhat disappointing. We have 3 long beeps. I'm guessing that's a memory error. Okay, so we had a memory error. I've just changed the memory. So we had a stick of 400 megahertz memory in there. I've just changed it for a 333. Same size, same socket, 333, and that seems to have calmed things down, but you never know with these old motherboards, you know what happened in the last video. So let's try again. So we're restarting again, and we're going to get another error. Nope, seems to be happy with this RAM stick. And there we have it, we have arrived at a desktop. Cool. So that took roughly about half an hour. There were 3 reboots in the process, one of which caused the motherboard to have a little bit of a fit, and we ended up having to change the RAM stick. But it has been successful. How successful? Let's have a little look at Device Manager. Okay, so it's recognised pretty much everything. It's got a standard VGA for the driver. It's recognised that it's an SIS chipset. It hasn't recognised the Ethernet controller, and it hasn't recognised that there's USB. Now, thanks to the marvel of archive.org and people who upload material there to Archive for Prosperity, we do actually have the original driver disk for this motherboard. So let's get that in the drive and see if it's any use. So I have to say this default install background is very, very boring, but don't forget this is the upgrade version, so it's not going to change any settings that you had previously. So I think that's why it looks like that. So here we go, this is the driver CD for this motherboard as per archive.org, and we have the drivers we need, the LAN driver and the USB driver, so that's nice. What else is on here? We've got some utilities, we've got DirectX 8.1, we've got some antivirus software, and we've got Acrobat Reader version 5. Let's install the drivers first. We might as well start at the top. just to make sure things are working as well as they can be. Because we're not going to install any other drivers that are related to AGP or PCI motherboard side of things, just specific for devices that's already detected. I'm not going to do a reboot in between installs, but we do need to reboot before we install the video graphics driver. Okay, so that didn't appear to do anything, but maybe it has. So let's restart at this point. So one of the things that Windows ME did was it improved the boot times to getting to the desktop quite considerably compared to previous versions of Windows, and I think that's pretty true. We've managed to get to the desktop pretty quick here. So let's look back at Device Manager. So it hasn't installed the PCI Ethernet controller driver correctly, or at least hasn't been recognized correctly. Let's try that one more time. Perhaps it's because we didn't do a reboot. So the network stack that comes within Windows ME is actually from Windows 2000 Pro. It's different from the one that was in Windows 98, and therefore should be more reliable in theory. And there we go. So the Device Manager is a bit more happy now. Next thing to do is get them drivers for the display and the sound working, and then we should have some audio and some better quality video. So let's see how good the USB support is. I have a 32 gig USB 3 drive here. It should be backwards compatible with USB 2. Let's plug it in and see what happens. Okay, so it has found the drive. Can it decipher it? Well, it doesn't look like it because it hasn't added it to my computer. Oh, we give it a few more seconds. Removable drive E. Drive E is not formatted. Okay, so it's obviously not happy with the partition that is on there, unfortunately. Don't think it's NTFS, but we definitely don't want to format it now because it's got loads of stuff on. Okay, let's try again with a different USB drive. So this is 16 gig and it's definitely FAT32. Yeah, progress. So let's sort out the graphics driver first. So we've got an NVIDIA card in here. Let's try some NVIDIA drivers. And I'm going to start with 4109 purely because that's been recommended in some ways and is around the right kind of time period for this card and this operating system. Got a hard disk activity light, so that's good. I'm going to plug that cable in correctly. We don't have a power light though. Oh, that's right, we didn't have the correct pinage for that. I think the most recent Windows ME graphics driver from NVIDIA is the 80 something. So this is quite an old graphics driver in that sense. But it is a GeForce 2 card, so just bear that in mind. Are we going to get a better desktop? Well, we certainly seem to have more colours. Let's see what has happened to display properties. Okay, so it's recognised the video card. In fact, let's just quickly go back to Device Manager. So yeah, so we no longer have the generic VGA driver, we do actually have a specific one, which is what this is. And we're running 800 by 600 at the moment. This monitor can go way higher than that. Let's leave it on that for now. And we're going to go for 32-bit color. Has it worked? Yes. That's nice. Okay, what are our options? So just let us go all the way up to the maximum resolution of this monitor, but we're just going to leave it at 800 by 600 for now. Let's click on Advanced, see what we get. So we've got all the usual Windows tabs, but we now have a GeForce 2 MX tab as well. Recognize it as a GeForce 2 MX MX400. It's got a TV encoder. It's recognised it as AGP4 times, which is correct. The motherboard will support up to 8, but the card only does 4. And it's recognised that it's got 64 megs of RAM. It's recognised the processor correctly, and we're running DirectX version 7 at the moment. Now, I'm a big fan of showing the Windows contents while dragging. That seems very 21st century. Excellent. So we're all good to go for display driver. Let's have a little look at audio. So, in fact, going back to Device Manager, it hasn't recognised there is an audio card installed. which is concerning. Let's see what happens if we try and install the drivers. I don't know about you guys, but I've got a love-hate relationship with Creative. They produce some good products, and they basically defined PC sound in many ways. But they release so many products with so many different product codes, with so many different driver combinations. It can be a bit of a nightmare trying to get Creative products to work. Setup is complete. So go back to Device Manager. We still don't have any audio devices in here, do we? So I think maybe this card hasn't been recognised or isn't basically just not working. Volume. It's not showing me a volume control, which makes me think it hasn't been recognised. Let's see if we can play anything. No, there's no audio device. So this card hasn't been recognised or isn't working, one or the other. So let's fix that. Luckily I have a different card that we can put in that should work. So I've moved the card to a different slot and that hasn't helped. So we're going to uninstall it. And we're going to uninstall all the software associated with it first. Okay, so we've removed everything apart from the display drivers and Ethernet drivers, so that's good. We'll turn off, remove the card, and then think about what we're going to put in instead. Looking at the card, it looks fine. The chips are warm, so you know they've been initialized. Nothing's overly hot. It could be a weird interaction with that particular chipset. But either way, we have another option. So I do have another Sound Blaster Live to put in there, but if it's an interaction with the chipset, that's not going to help. So the other option is to put in a different card, and this is the Sound Blaster Audigy. And this is the card that did supersede the Live. It came out in 2001, so it is age appropriate. It's a little bit more high-end, which is why I wasn't going to use it in this mid-range build, but it is a perfectly age-appropriate card. And you know, if we saved a bit of money here and there, we might be able to splurge on a decent sound card. So let's try this one and see if this gets us any further. So one thing that was happening before is on that PCI summary, it wasn't being listed as one of the cards. So just here, okay. So now we're getting some information about what's in slot 2. So that means it's more like it's been recognized. We have the Audigy driver CD, again from archive.org. So it's going to try and recognize the drivers, and it's not going to be able to find them because the card came out after Windows ME. So we're just going to go through that plug and play initialization, but now we're going to use the driver CD. I'll just restart first. The operating system running on this computer is not supported by this product. That's unhelpful. Okay, second driver CD, let's give it a go. Well, it hasn't kicked us out, so that means that we're probably getting in the right direction. Looks like it's going to update DirectX as well. So DirectX 9.0C is the last version, or the most up-to-date version that will work on Windows ME. We originally had DirectX 7 on here, so it'll be interesting to see what it updates it to. So no more problems with the restarting. So I think that other memory DIMM is faulty, or at least not compatible with this motherboard. We're going to get some sound from the speaker. The hard drive and the fan, by the way, on the computer are very quiet, considering the case is off. Yeah, I'm not hearing anything, but we still don't have a startup sound, so I'm not hearing anything, unfortunately. Okay, that's weird. The speaker jack wasn't in. When I plugged it in, it caused it to crash. Not only did it crash, it reset the whole machine. Pretty impressive, in a bad way. This is one of the differences with Windows ME versus Windows 98, is that the check disk that happens on the disk after a reboot, or a forced reboot, is actually within Windows. It's not the DOS-based scan disk. So Windows ME did introduce a lot of features that we now kind of take for granted. Protection of system files, better detection and correction of random reboots. I think automatic updates was a Windows ME feature, wasn't it? So I'm not sure if there's supposed to be any audio associated with that. Forced restart of the computer as well. all is not well in creative land. So it looks like the Windows ME plug and play database has become corrupted, because we're now reinstalling all the drivers for stuff we'd already installed for. That's quite a big crash, considering all I did was plug in the audio jack. Yeah, it's installing everything. It's reverted to the standard VGA driver as well. But does sound work? Let's just see if sound works. Okay. I don't know if you heard that, but we had audio. Okay, so we're back to where we started, but we did have some audio then. Did you hear it? Let's see if we can get the creative demos to work. Well, I do have it installed, thank you very much. So yeah, the whole plug and play database is completely corrupted. We had to go back. We haven't even got the SAS drivers anymore installed, so let's just quickly fix that. But we now have sound drivers. Oh dear. That doesn't look good. So last night I was just loading up some benchmarks and some other graphical stuff. And I did run the FutureMark benchmark once, and just towards the end I was starting to get a little bit of artifacting, and I thought it was because it was getting too hot. So I dug out this fan to possibly add to the graphics card, but we're now getting artifacting and a failure to boot after being off all night. So in fact, I suspect this video card RAM has had it, which is a bit of a shame because I really like that card. Let's get another one in there. So we can't use this GeForce 2 MX400 card, which would have been the perfect mid-range card for 2000-2001. So what are we going to use instead? Well, we do have this is a little bit of a cheat. This is an ATI FireGL 8800 series, and that's basically the same as an ATI Radeon 8500, so 8500. But there are two problems with that. One is that would have been a very expensive card in 2001, wouldn't have been mid-range at all. Also, there's no native Windows ME drivers for this. Windows XP is the earliest native driver. Now, because it is the same as a Radeon 8500, you can modify the Radeon 8500 drivers to work on Windows ME with this card, but it's a bit of a faff. And as I said, it's a bit of a cheat anyway, because it would have been an expensive card. Coincidentally, this came this morning. This I ordered for a different project, but is appropriate for this. So this is a NVIDIA Quadro 2 MXR. So basically it is a GeForce 2 MX, but in the Quadro workstation format. So this card would have been a bit more expensive than the standard GeForce 2, but because it was aimed at workstations and businesses, but it is basically just an MX2, a GeForce 2 MX card. So this really is kind of more appropriate for this build. So hopefully this is working. It was told to me is working, so we'll put this in and see what we get. So what is this specifically? It's an ELSA Synergy 2000, which is, as I said, basically the same thing as the GeForce 2 MX. This is a 32 meg card, not a 64 meg card, which explains why it's also available at low profile. But essentially they should be similar in performance. It's also AGP ×4, and there are graphic drives available for ME natively for this card rather than the 8800. So let's put this in and have a little look, see if it works. That's not a good sign. Let me reseat the card. Oh, give me a break. So I'm not sure what's upset it now, but it's not happy with this video card. Feel the contacts, they're not rising or rough or anything, so they should be fine. So that's 2 short beeps followed by 8 long beeps, was it? So the other thing it could be is the memory on the actual video card, unfortunately. Yeah, maybe this card isn't actually working. Okay, so I've confirmed the card works by putting it in another motherboard. and having put it back in this motherboard, it's now working. So whatever the problem was, I don't know, maybe we've got a slightly dodgy AGP slot, maybe. It's possible the motherboard is still slightly dodgy. Let's see if we can boot into Windows. PCI audio device, so it's not happy with the sound card driver. So it's recognised the new video card, which is good. So as you can see, it's found the correct video driver because we have high resolution display and we have full colour icons. So it's recognised it correctly and it's already using a driver that was on there. Maybe it's using the existing MX driver, which is great. That's really good. But it looks like we've lost the sound card. Okay. These sound blaster icons on the desktop are also missing. So for some reason the sound card has uninstalled itself. Okay, looks like we might actually be getting somewhere. So we now have the creative software reinstalled, the toolbar, the creative toolbar at the top has appeared, and I'm not getting any errors on boot. And the GPU seems to be recognised as well. So let's have a little look at what we've got. So we've got CPU-Z for retro computers. It's confirming we've got the AMD Duron with a Morgan core running at 1.1 gigahertz. All good, that's entirely what we expected. And we're running at 4x, so that's good on the AGP card. So this memory is rated at 166 DDR, so 333. To double check it's working at that speed in a minute. Let's do a quick benchmark. Okay, so what we can compare it against? So the fastest thing in here is a VIA Eden 1 gigahertz. That's not a very efficient processor in terms of performance, and as you can see, it doesn't compare very well with what we've got in here, even though they're similar clock speeds. The floating point is nearly 4 times better, and the main CPU is not quite twice as fast, maybe 1.8 times as fast. And we haven't got anything else in this list that's kind of super appropriate. If you're curious, let's compare it to a K63. So it's 2.5 times faster on both the integer and floating point. So it's recognised NVIDIA Quadro 2 MXR, 32 megs of RAM, definitely capable of 166, but is that what it's being run at? I've got it on auto. Let's set it at 166 just to confirm. Let's run power strip. So we're running power strip because we haven't got GPU-Z that works on this version of Windows, but adapter information from power strip does tell us some stuff. So it's recognised the brand and it's running at 4 times the rate of transfer, which is correct. So this tells us the memory clock's running at 166 megahertz and the core is 175 megahertz. So let's run some benchmarks, see what happens. Let's do some graphics benchmarks first. So we're just going to leave everything as default and run it. Okay, well, we lost audio. That's not a good sign. Okay, so visually it's fine, there's no artifacts. I'm just about to say audio was behaving itself, but it's just gone again. Okay, we might have to take this audio card out and just rely on the onboard audio for now. So, final reality crashed at the end. I'm guessing because of the audio cutouts, it's probably that, so let's just get rid of this audio card. Okay, we're having a bit of a mare with this motherboard. It's claiming there's another RAM issue on this card, even though all we did was power it off and back on again. So I think there's something wrong with this connector. Physically it looks in good condition, but let's just try cleaning it out. First of all, we're going to use some compressed air. The problem with compressed air is it often contains quite a lot of moisture. So we're going to have to wait for it to dry as well. What I'm also going to do is try some deoxit. Never tried the opposite on an AGP card before, so it's interesting. I'm just going to put in the known broken card just to exercise the connectors a couple of times. Then we're going to give it 10-15 minutes to dry. So I don't know if you noticed in that last clip, the motherboard moved very slightly. So I've just put an extra screw in to hold the tray in place, because that's probably not helping with any connection issues. So in goes the working video card. So I've just screwed it into place, but I'm also going to activate the AGP lock to see if that helps stabilize this card in the slot. Okay, let's try again. Well, we're not getting any beeps, but we're also not getting any video signal. Press the reset button. Aha! Okay. So, just going to make sure nothing has changed in the BIOS since we messed around with it. Okay, I can't get rid of this creative boot screen. I've uninstalled all the drivers. There's nothing else in the add or remove in control panel. So either going to have to use the third-party tool to get rid of any registry entries, or I'm going to have to search through the registry entries myself, or, which is looking like the most appealing option at the moment, is I might just wipe this and start again with Windows ME. We have not had a lot of luck with Socket A so far. In the other video, it was a complete failure. In this video, we've had multiple issues, so I'm tempted just to wipe the slate clean and start again. So let's do that. I'm not going to video that because this video is probably getting a bit long already. Okay, we're making a little bit of progress. So the onboard sound didn't work, so I've stuck in a C Media based PCI card, a generic one. It's a slightly different chipset, but it seemed to work just out of the box. So we're just doing that. We're now running the Microsoft 2004 update CD that came out just to install the latest browser, latest software updates to the operating system. Once that's finished, we'll do some benchmarking. So in 3D Mark 99 Max at the default settings, that is 800 by 600 16-bit color, we're getting 5,741 3D marks. So you don't get a frame rate in the demo mode, but it's pretty attractive to look at, and there isn't any glitching, and all the appropriate effects seem to be working correctly with mist and haze, etc, etc. So I'm having a slight problem with the graphics still, so cleaning out the AGP card port has definitely helped stability. I might even try the 8-bit card back in there at some point, but certain games and benchmarks are artifacting. Specifically it's 3D Mark 2000 and The Sims, both of which are causing problems, and yet 3D Mark 2001 isn't. So I think this is a driver issue or a DirectX issue. So we're currently on DirectX 9.0C, but we might downgrade to 9.0B. So if I run 2001, for example, as you can see, it runs just fine. So I think it's a driver / software issue. So I'm going to try some older versions of the NVIDIA drivers. The one that is on there at the moment is the most up-to-date one, which is the one that's available from the NVIDIA website. What I've got though is a whole host of older NVIDIA drivers. So the earliest one I've got, I think, is, there's definitely some 40s in there. I think there's a 35 in here somewhere. So we'll start with a low number and work our way up until we can get things working properly. There's a 2311, that's probably the earliest one. Okay, so this is with the earliest driver that was available, 22 something. It's much better visually and seems totally fine now. This driver was released after this card was made, so it should be fully happy with the card itself. There was an error on installation though, so I'm actually going to go for the next driver up to see if that gives a clean install. Okay, I'm using driver 3082. Let's see if that works. Yeah, that's working fine. So I'm interested to see if the performance is any different when I run some benchmarks. The other thing that was happening was that on Colin McRae Rally, the menu wasn't working properly. So let's just check that. And now the menu's working. That wasn't visible when we tried with the original drivers, which were in the up in 81s. So let's run some benchmarks using this series of drivers and see if we get any different results. 6,377. So I can't remember what the original score was, so we'll have to look on the tape, see if that was an improvement or not. So moving on to 3D Mark 2000, so this wouldn't run before correctly, at least visually not correctly. It was running, I just couldn't see anything. So 3D Mark 2000 comes in at 5,028. Okay, and for 2001 we have 2,594 3D marks. So Flight Simulator is running very smoothly in its default configuration. Let's try running it at 32 bits, 1024. So 1024, 32-bit with 2 windows open, things are still very playable. So let's try something slightly different. Let's try The Sims. So, confession here, I have never ever played The Sims before. Shocking, I know. It's not really my kind of thing. So this is all working better. There was quite a lot of glitching going on with the previous driver, but this 30 series seems to be pretty stable. Okay, well I can play this later, but the long and short of it is that graphics are working absolutely fine. Performance is reasonable. I can move around reasonably quickly. There's a little bit of lag, but overall it's okay. Cool. So these are all games that were released in the year 2000 or 2001, and these seem appropriate for our mid-range 2001 build. Now comes the tricky one. We're going to play Colin McRae Rally, but first we need to install some hardware. That was such a faff to remember why I don't get this out very often. But this Microsoft force feedback steering wheel and pedal combination is great for playing this game. If it's playable on this computer, let's find out. Oh, I do remember this intro. What a great intro to a game. Hopefully there's no copyright strike on that. So, options, graphics. So it's recognised the display card, which is good. We're going to run 640 by 480 to start with. Everything is all set to pretty low. Let's see if we can actually do a race.
3, 2, 1, go.
So there's quite a lot of stuttering around this start section. Probably just the dynamics of all the other cars, and then it kind of settles down. So once you get past that corner, it just seems to settle down, even though the number of cars are the same. So I'm not quite sure what that is. The rest of the track seems to be pretty smooth, but we're only running at 640 by 480, don't forget. So there's quite a lot of stuttering as well. I wouldn't really say it's playable. I think part of it may be due to the force feedback, I'm not entirely sure. So these sections seem fine. Oops, so that's all good. I had to patch the game to 1.09. Luckily that is still available on archive.org. Let's just see what happens start turning some of these options on and see what happens. So I've kept the same resolution, but I've upped all the graphics options. Let's see how bad it becomes. So music's playing fine, sound effects are stuttering, graphics obviously stuttering. Something is not quite happy. Visuals have improved a bit, getting more reflections and stuff. Okay, so we've changed it to 1024 by 768 16-bit. Let's turn all the advanced features off there. Let's see if it looks any better, plays any better, or looks worse, plays any worse. So we're getting about a frame a second at the moment. And it just suddenly improves as you get past that first corner for some reason. It's still poor. It is pretty much unplayable. At this resolution it looks better, even with the options turned off. And occasionally you get these just kind of freezes where it freezes for half a second or so. So I wouldn't call it playable, unfortunately. So there we have it. We finally managed to build a working Socket A system. It's a mid-range 2001 build, roughly. And it performed pretty much as I would expect it to. Using the desktop is very, very responsive. There's no problem there at all. The benchmarks are reasonable for a mid-range system. Playing games, so The Sims was fine, Flight Simulator was fine, but Colin McRae Rally had some very significant frame rate drops right at the very beginning, but also occasionally around the circuit. And I'm not quite sure what that is, whether that's a limit in the memory, or whether that's a limit in the graphics card, or whether it's to do with force feedback or the sound. Not entirely sure. I'm going to look into that a little bit more. But a very usable, playable system from 2001. Once we've got this card reader back in here, it's going to look great as well. So I'm very happy with that. What did we learn? Well, the Socket A system, because of the age and because of the capacitor plague at the time, the Socket A systems are very, very flaky, very fickle. We went through several motherboards before we got to this one. Couldn't get the sound card to work in this system, couldn't get the onboard sound to work in the system. Ended up with a generic, no-name C-Media PCI card that did work. I'm not sure how much of that is down to the drivers, how much it's down to the kind of the hardware, whether there are some borderline capacitors on the system that are making it not work 100%. Not entirely sure. But overall, I'm very happy with this build. You're probably going to see this build again. We may try and upgrade this, see if we can get a little bit more performance out of this Socket A system. But going forwards, we're going to be looking at probably a Socket 939 system next when we're talking about AMD stuff. So let me know your thoughts. Did you have a system like this? What do you think I could do to improve this? Still seeing as a graphics card. If you've got any comments or suggestions about what we should do next with this, there I'm all ears. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe. We'll see you on the next one. Thank you for watching.